January 26, 1945, 2:15 p.m. Near Holtzwihr, France. Gefreiter Klaus Weber, advancing with his Panzer Grenadier squad through knee-deep snow, watched American tank destroyer crews abandon their burning vehicle and flee into the woods. Standard procedure, get out before ammunition cooks off, but then one American climbed back up onto the flames. Weber's squad leader screamed, "Wahnsinnig, madman!" The officers had promised easy victory. Only 18 Americans defending the Bois de Riedier, token resistance against Weber's company of 250 men, backed by 6 Panzer tanks. The American M10 was already burning from an 80mm shell hit, flames consuming the fighting compartment, ammunition ready to explode any second. Temperature hung at -10 Celsius, the coldest winter in 40 years, and this American chose to stand atop a crematorium. Then the machine gun opened fire. Weber's friends began falling in the snow. Behind them, American artillery started landing, impossibly close, within 50 meters of the burning destroyer. Who was this American calling fire on his own position? Weber pressed his face into frozen earth and prayed. He would never learn that the figure silhouetted against flames was 19 years old, weighed 50 kilograms, and had stopped going to school at age 11. The American on the burning tank destroyer was Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy. Born June 20, 1925, in a sharecropper's shack near Kingston, Hunt County, Texas. One of 12 children. 5th grade education. Height 5 feet 5.5 inches. Weight at enlistment 112 pounds. By every measure, he had no business in uniform, let alone commanding men in combat against the Wehrmacht's finest. Hunt County in the 1920s meant cotton fields, poverty, and survival. Murphy's father, Emmett, abandoned the family when Audie was young. His mother, Josie Bell, struggled to feed 12 children on sharecropper wages, picking cotton, working land they'd never own. Audie quit school after 5th grade to work the fields full-time, contributing pennies to keep his siblings fed. When his mother died in 1941, 16-year-old Audie became responsible for younger brothers and sisters. The army, he later wrote, was the only place that would give me 3 meals a day. It wasn't patriotism that drove him to the recruiter after Pearl Harbor, it was hunger. But the army didn't want Audie Murphy. Too young, rejected. He tried the Marines. Too short, rejected. He tried the paratroopers. Too light, rejected. His sister Corinne helped him falsify his birth certificate, adding a year to his age. In June 1942, the army finally accepted him, though the recruitment officer nearly changed his mind. Murphy looked like a strong wind would break him. During basic training, other soldiers called him kid and baby. Some thought he was someone's son who'd wandered onto base by mistake. The army shipped Private Murphy to North Africa, then to the Sicily invasion in July 1943. Combat has a way of sorting men. The capable survive, the incapable die, and the exceptional rise through the carnage of their superiors. Murphy was exceptional. He killed his first German soldier in Sicily, an experience that left him shaking. By the Italian campaign, Salerno, Anzio, Monte Cassino, he'd stopped shaking. Promotion to corporal, then sergeant, then staff sergeant. Each promotion came because the man above Murphy died. Southern France, August 1944. The 3rd Infantry Division landed near Saint-Tropez as part of Operation Dragoon. Murphy, now a platoon sergeant, led men through the Rhône Valley into the Vosges Mountains. The fighting turned brutal, dense forest, German defensive positions, artillery that killed without warning. Murphy watched his closest friends die. Lieutenant Manning, who'd looked after Murphy since Sicily, killed by German machine gun. Sergeant Tipton, Murphy's mentor, killed by artillery. Corporal Brandon, Murphy's foxhole partner, killed by sniper. Each death hardened something in Murphy, transformed grief into protective rage. He couldn't save his friends, but he'd die before he let his remaining men down. October 1944. Murphy received a battlefield commission to second lieutenant, age 19. the youngest company commander in the 3rd Infantry Division. He personally selected the men for Company B, veterans who'd survived Sicily, Italy, France, men who trusted him because he never asked them to do anything he wouldn't do first. Private Charles Owen, one of Murphy's hand-picked soldiers, later recalled, "He was very protective of his men. He wouldn't let us do anything he wouldn't do." Murphy led from the front, took the same risks, ate the same rations, slept in the same frozen foxholes. By January 1945, Murphy had earned 2 Purple Hearts, wounded in Sicily, wounded in France. He'd been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, 2 Bronze Stars, and numerous other decorations. 24 confirmed kills, likely many more. But decorations meant nothing compared to keeping his men alive. Company B had started the Vosges campaign at near full strength, 250 men. By January 26, 1945, only 18 remained. Not because Murphy was reckless, because the 3rd Infantry Division had been in continuous combat since Sicily. No replacements, no rest, just attrition. The sharecropper's son, who'd been rejected by every branch of service, who weighed 112 pounds soaking wet, who'd quit school in 5th grade, this boy now commanded the remnants of Company B in the frozen forests of Alsace. The army had given him 3 meals a day. He'd given it everything else. And on January 26, 1945, the bill would come due in fire and blood near a small French village called Holtzwihr. The question wasn't whether Murphy would fight. The question was whether 18 men could hold against 250. January 26, 1945. When Audie Murphy took his battered Company B to the edge of the Bois de Riedvier, he occupied ground that mattered far beyond the lives of his 18 remaining men. The Colmar Pocket, the last twisted bulge of German occupation west of the Rhine, defined the Allied urgency in Alsace. In that month, as the war seemed to lurch toward its end, the frozen land itself became as deadly as any waiting enemy gun. The strategic importance was immediate and brutal. After months of grinding attrition in western France, the 19th German Army had retreated across the Vosges Mountains, their battered divisions clinging desperately to territory around Colmar. Alsace was not just French soil. Many German soldiers defending it genuinely considered it German, reclaimed in 1940 and lost only at obvious risk of court-martial or worse. Hitler's direct edict was clear: hold Alsace at all costs, for losing it meant ceding a bridgehead to Allied forces before the ultimate push into the Reich. General Devers of the American 6th Army Group and General de Lattre for the French First Army coordinated a pincer movement to finally close the pocket early in 1945. The U.S. 3rd Infantry Division, Murphy's parent unit, moved into the frigid Vosges to support French advances and exploit the German collapse, joined by the freshly deployed U.S. 28th Infantry Division on their flank. The objective was to carve away the pocket's defensive forests, including the critical Bois de Riedvier, where Murphy's stand would occur, forcing the Germans back east of the Rhine. But strategy was only half the enemy. January 1945 brought the coldest winter in 40 years to eastern France. Temperatures plunged to -10°C at night. Daylight rarely offered relief, hovering near 14 degrees. 2 feet of snow buried foxholes and roads alike, ground so frozen that soldiers could hardly dig new positions. Frostbite became as feared as bullets, boots failed, gloves disintegrated, rifles jammed. Both sides struggled to move men and supplies through a landscape that seemed to resist every step. For Murphy and his men, the numbers spelled disaster. Company B should have fielded 250 men. Continuous combat, disease, and frostbite shaved those numbers down to a ghost crew of just 18. The entire 1st Battalion had been so drained by weeks of fighting, first in the Vosges, then through the bleak forests of Alsace, that they operated under strength, sometimes unable to muster a single full rifle company. Ammunition was limited by supply routes. Hot meals and sleep had become rare memories. Only 2 battered M10 tank destroyers from the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion provided support, mobile coffins fighting against mathematics and enemy guns. German defenders, meanwhile, dug into strongholds like Holtzwihr and strategic villages across Alsace. Despite crumbling numbers, down to fewer than 20,000 men, less than a single French division, their officers believed the terrain and winter favored them. In Holtzwir's stone houses and deep trenches, they shivered but prepared, supplied with formidable Panzer tanks, 80 mm anti-tank guns, and orders that left no room for withdrawal. The hell in the snow was not an exaggeration. The cold delayed attacks, shut down air support, and exhausted every unit involved. The alternate freeze and thaw played with men's hope and despair. Murphy's 19-year-old body, battered by months of attrition and scant nutrition, was typical. Men from both sides suffered. Skin split by cold, fingers numb on trigger guards, breath sharp in air that bit with every inhalation. Visibility shrank as snow and fog blanketed the woods. The difference between cover and death often reduced to inches. Add to this mix the enormous pressure of fighting for ground literally at the door of Germany. The Allied advance was not just about victory, it was about the long-awaited crossing of the Rhine. Every forest, every stone wall, and every village like Holtzwihr could spell delay, disaster, or breakthrough. Murphy stood not merely as a boy against an army, but as a thin thread in the rope dragging an entire front eastward. On January 26th, as German tanks rolled into position and waves of infantry massed behind them, Company B's battered survivors stared over snow-drifted fields at the impossible fight ahead. They had no reinforcements, little hope of relief, and only the barest promise of artillery support, itself dependent on fragile telephone wires snaking through icy woods. The cold could kill before a bullet ever found its mark. But Company B waited in silence as the rumble of armored engines mixed with the groan of frozen trees. 18 men, a handful of rounds, 2 tank destroyers, and Audie Murphy, their commander, who would soon rewrite every rule about what was possible in war. The fate of the Colmar Pocket hung by a thread, and the young lieutenant with a 5th-grade education would be asked for everything he had. The 2 M10 tank destroyers attached to Company B represented America's compromise between speed and firepower, a compromise that looked fatal against what waited in Holtzwihr. Officially designated the 3-inch gun motor carriage M10, crews called them Wolverines when they felt generous and Purple Heart boxes when they told the truth. The M10's main armament, a 3-inch M7 gun capable of firing 54 rounds, could penetrate most German armor at medium range. Mounted on a modified Sherman chassis, it reached 51 kilometers per hour, fast enough to reposition quickly after an ambush. The operational range of 300 kilometers allowed for extended patrols. But speed came at a lethal cost. Armor thickness between 10 and 57 millimeters, concentrated at the front slope and virtually non-existent on the sides. The turret sat open to the sky, a design flaw that left crews vulnerable to artillery, airburst, grenades, and even determined rifle fire from elevated positions. American tank destroyer doctrine emphasized shoot and scoot, ambush enemy armor from concealed positions, fire, then relocate before return fire arrived. The M10 was never intended for static defense, never designed to hold ground against massed infantry and tank assaults. At Holtzwihr, Murphy's 2 tank destroyers would be asked to do exactly what their designers had warned against. The secondary armament atop each M10 turret, a Browning M2 HB 50 caliber heavy machine gun, was mounted for anti-aircraft defense and suppressing infantry. Weighing 38 kilograms, the M2 fired at a cyclic rate between 450 and 600 rounds per minute with an effective range of 1,830 meters. Muzzle velocity reached 930 meters per second, enough to punch through light armor and absolutely devastate unprotected infantry. The ammunition mix of armor-piercing ball and tracer rounds made it visible and terrifying. Private Charles Owen would later recall, the Germans were deathly afraid of 50 calibers. They had armor-piercing capabilities. But the 50 caliber could not stop a Panzer. It was the wrong weapon for the coming fight. Standing against Murphy's thin-skinned destroyers were German tanks that embodied 5 years of brutal Eastern Front lessons. The Panzer IV, likely variant H or J, mounted a 75mm Kabuki Counterattack 40L48 gun capable of engaging targets at ranges the M10 couldn't match. Frontal armor ranged from 50 to 80 millimeters, not impenetrable, but thick enough to defeat many American rounds at distance. Weighing 25 tons and capable of 40 kilometers per hour, the Panzer IV had evolved from Poland in 1939 to become Germany's most reliable workhorse tank. If Panther tanks joined the assault, and intelligence suggested they might, the imbalance became grotesque. The Panther's 75mm Kabuki 42L70 high-velocity gun could penetrate 140 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters, making it lethal to any Allied tank at combat ranges. Sloped frontal armor of 80 millimeters, angled at 55 degrees, provided effective protection equivalent to 140 millimeters against most American guns. At 45 tons, the Panther outweighed the M10 by 15 tons of intimidation. American tankers had learned to fear the Panther. Its gun could kill from distances where American return fire merely sparked off German armor. But the true nightmare weapon German forces deployed in the Colmar Pocket was the 80mm PaK-43 anti-tank gun. Capable of penetrating 165 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters, the 80mm could destroy any Allied armor from well beyond effective return fire range. Its high muzzle velocity, over 1,000 meters per second, meant shells arrived almost instantly after firing. German gunners positioned 80mm guns in concealed positions, covering approaches, waiting for American armor to expose itself. Against the M10's 10 to 57 millimeters of armor, an 80mm hit was mathematically guaranteed to penetrate. The M10 offered no protection, only the illusion of safety until German gunners found their range. The tactical mathematics were brutal. Murphy's two M10s, with their paper-thin armor and doctrine written for mobile warfare, would face German armor designed to dominate open battlefields and anti-tank guns that could kill from invisible positions. The crews of the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion knew this. They'd lost brothers to 80mm fire in Italy and France. Every time they positioned their destroyers forward of friendly infantry, they calculated odds that rarely favored survival. Murphy understood the imbalance. He'd watched German tanks shrug off American fire in the Vosges. He'd seen what an 88mm shell did to armored vehicles, the penetration, the fire, the screaming. But Company B's defensive position required the M10s forward on the narrow dirt road leading from Holtzwihr through the Bois de Riedwehr. German armor would advance along that road. The tank destroyers had to meet them, had to trade their thin protection for a few crucial minutes of fire before the inevitable hit came. Staff Sergeant Joseph Tardif commanded one of the M10s. He positioned his destroyer approximately 40 yards ahead of Murphy's command post. Turret traversed toward Holtzwihr, engine idling in the frozen afternoon. The .50 caliber on his turret held between 300 and 450 rounds, enough for perhaps one sustained engagement. Tardif knew the numbers. Every tank destroyer commander knew the numbers. Against massed German armor and infantry, the M10 would buy time measured in minutes, not hours. And when the 80mm shell found Tardif's destroyer at 2:15 p.m. on January 26, 1945, the mathematics resolved with fire and screaming metal. The crew bailed out, standard procedure, the correct decision. The vehicle burned, ammunition cooking off, hydraulic fluid feeding flames that should have consumed everything. But Murphy saw the .50 caliber machine gun, still mounted on the turret, untouched by flames. 38 kilograms of steel that could fire 600 rounds per minute. The only weapon between his 18 men and 250 Germans, advancing with 6 tanks. The paper shield had failed. Now Murphy would replace armor with audacity. Murphy's thin line of 18 men facing 250 Germans backed by 6 tanks might have been annihilated in minutes. except for one critical American advantage that German forces could never match: artillery. By January 1945, U.S. field artillery had evolved into the most lethal indirect fire system ever deployed, and Murphy knew how to wield it like a scalpel. The American artillery doctrine relied on forward observers embedded directly with infantry companies. Lieutenant Walter Weisspfenning, assigned as forward observer to Murphy's Company B, carried the most important weapon in the frozen forest: a field telephone connected by wire back through battalion headquarters to the fire direction centers controlling entire batteries of howitzers. That telephone line, vulnerable to every shell and piece of shrapnel, represented Murphy's lifeline and his only means of equalizing the mathematics of 14-1. Behind Murphy's position, American M2 105mm howitzers sat ready. These workhorses of divisional artillery could fire 4 rounds per minute out to 12,000 meters with devastating high-explosive shells. Heavier M1 155mm long tom howitzers, positioned further back, reached out to 14,600 meters with shells that could crack bunkers and shatter morale. American industrial capacity meant unlimited ammunition. Batteries could fire for hours without concern for rationing. Fire direction centers could coordinate multiple batteries to land shells simultaneously on a single target, a technique called time on target that multiplied destructive effect. German artillery, by contrast, had been bled dry by years of Eastern Front attrition and strategic bombing of industrial centers. Ammunition was rationed, guns were worn. Forward observer systems existed, but lacked the integration and responsiveness of American doctrine. More critically, German batteries faced constant threat from Allied aircraft and counter-battery fire. By January 1945, calling for artillery support often meant waiting, if support came at all. Murphy had trained extensively in directing artillery fire. He understood the arcane language of adjustments: add 50, right 100, fire for effect, that translated observed impacts into devastating precision. He'd called fire dozens of times in Italy and France, learning through trial and survival how close he could bring shells to friendly positions without killing his own men. Time 0.5s. The official minimum for danger-close fire support was 600 meters. Murphy would soon prove those minimums were suggestions, not limits. The field telephone itself was deceptively simple technology: copper wire, a hand-cranked generator, a receiver. But that wire connection provided reliability radio could not match in 1945. Radios suffered interference, required line of sight in many cases, and batteries died in extreme cold. The telephone line Murphy and Weisspfenning maintained ran back through the frozen forest, spliced where shells had cut it, protected where possible, essential. As long as that line held, Murphy could reach the fire direction center. As long as he could talk, he could kill. On the morning of January 26th, Murphy positioned his command post in a shallow drainage ditch 10 yards in front of the rearmost M10 tank destroyer. The field telephone sat beside him, already connected, already tested. Weisspfenning coordinated with the artillery officer at 1st Battalion headquarters, establishing pre-planned target reference points, suspected German assembly areas, likely avenues of approach, coordinates for the open ground between the Bois de Riedwehr and Holtzwihr. When the attack came, Murphy wouldn't waste time explaining geography. He'd call target numbers and adjustments, and shells would fly. The system's responsiveness gave American infantry incredible confidence. A well-trained forward observer could bring fire within 2 minutes of calling for support. Murphy was better than well-trained. He was a survivor who'd learned that artillery killed more Germans than bullets ever would. His voice on that telephone carried the weight of entire batteries, dozens of guns, hundreds of shells. But the system had a fatal vulnerability: communication. If the telephone line was cut, Murphy lost his advantage. If he couldn't talk to the fire direction center, the howitzers might as well be in Texas. German forces knew this. Standard assault doctrine included suppressing forward observers, cutting communication lines, isolating American infantry from their artillery support. Once isolated, American companies became just men with rifles against German tanks and superior numbers. Murphy understood the gamble. His 18 men couldn't stop 250 Germans through rifle fire alone. The two M10 tank destroyers provided mobile firepower, but would be priority targets for German 88mm guns. Artillery was the equalizer, the weapon that could shred massed infantry and force tanks to retreat. But only if the telephone kept working. Only if Murphy stayed alive long enough to call fire. At 2 p.m. on January 26th, German artillery opened the counterattack with a preliminary barrage. Murphy grabbed the field telephone and called the artillery officer at battalion headquarters. "Stand by for fire mission," he said, voice steady despite shells impacting around his position. He arranged for the 2nd Battalion's artillery to prepare for rapid fire on pre-planned targets. Then German tanks emerged from Holtzwihr, 6 of them, turrets traversing, main guns seeking targets. Behind them, 250 infantry in white winter camouflage advanced like ghosts across snow-covered fields. Murphy spoke coordinates into the telephone. Seconds later, American shells began landing among the advancing Germans. The artillery worked for now, but Murphy knew the moment the telephone line was cut, or the moment he couldn't reach it, his company would die. The Germans were 1,000 meters away and closing. Murphy's finger stayed on the telephone receiver, his only connection to survival, his only weapon that could stop tanks. Then at 2:15 p.m., a German 80mm shell found one of the M10 tank destroyers. Direct hit. The vehicle erupted in flames. The crew bailed out and ran for the woods. Standard procedure, correct decision. Murphy watched American armored support burning 40 yards ahead of his position. Germans were 800 meters away now, infantry spreading into assault formation, tanks advancing steadily. Murphy ordered his 18 men to fall back to better positions in the wood line. They retreated, taking the wounded, dragging equipment. Murphy stayed forward with the field telephone. If he fell back, he'd lose sight of the advancing Germans. If he couldn't see them, he couldn't adjust artillery fire. And without accurate fire, the artillery was just noise. The burning M10 blazed 40 yards ahead. Murphy could see the 50 caliber machine gun mounted on the turret, untouched by flames. 38 kilograms of steel capable of firing 600 rounds per minute. The only weapon between his retreating men and 250 Germans closing to 600 meters. Murphy grabbed the field telephone and started running toward the burning tank. Destroyer. The line dragged behind him through snow, across frozen ground, staying connected, barely. If that wire broke, he'd lose artillery. If he didn't reach the 50 caliber, he'd lose everything. The Germans were close enough now that Murphy could see white camouflage suits, rifles, the infantry advancing in practiced formations. They expected the Americans to keep running. They didn't expect one lieutenant to climb onto a burning vehicle and fight alone. Murphy reached the M10, flames roaring from the fighting compartment, heat washing over him in waves. He climbed up. The field telephone receiver hung from his shoulder. His right hand found the 50 caliber's charging handle. Artillery would keep them honest. The machine gun would keep them dying. And Murphy would stay on that burning platform until the mathematics resolved or the vehicle exploded beneath him. The mathematics of death were precise and unforgiving. An M10 tank destroyer hit by an 80mm shell burned at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit in the fighting compartment. Inside, 54 rounds of 3-inch ammunition waited to cook off, each round capable of exploding with enough force to tear the vehicle apart. 300 to 450 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition added to the volatile equation. Hydraulic fluid fed the flames, thick black smoke pouring from the open turret. The M10 was a bomb waiting to detonate, and every crewman knew it. Staff Sergeant Joseph Tardif and his crew had made the only rational decision: bail out and run. The vehicle was lost. Standing near it meant dying when ammunition detonated. Tank destroyer crews drilled evacuation procedures until they could empty a burning vehicle in under 20 seconds. Tardif's crew had executed perfectly, sprinting for the woodline 40 yards behind the blazing wreck. But Murphy's rational calculations differed from normal men's. German infantry had closed to 600 meters and were spreading into assault formation across the snow-covered field. 6 Panzer tanks advanced behind them, turrets traversing, searching for targets. Murphy's 18 men were falling back to defensive positions in the trees. Without forward fire to slow the Germans, they'd overrun Company B's position in minutes. The 50 caliber machine gun mounted on the M10's turret remained, untouched by flames, 38 kilograms of steel capable of firing up to 600 rounds per minute. The only weapon between retreating Americans and advancing Germans, the only weapon Murphy could reach. He ordered Lieutenant Wispfenning to maintain the artillery fire. Then Murphy grabbed the field telephone receiver, draped the wire over his shoulder, and ran toward the burning tank destroyer. 40 yards through snow, while German machine gun fire kicked up frozen dirt around him. The wire dragged behind, staying connected, Murphy's lifeline to the artillery batteries. The heat hit him first. Waves of thermal energy radiating from the burning vehicle, intense enough to feel from 10 feet away. Black smoke poured from the fighting compartment, the acrid stench of burning rubber and hydraulic fluid. Flames roared inside the hull. Murphy could hear ammunition beginning to cook off, small arms rounds popping like firecrackers. Every instinct, every survival mechanism hardwired into human beings screamed at Murphy to stay away from the burning vehicle. But Murphy climbed up anyway. His boots found perches on the track guards. Hands gripped metal hot enough to burn through gloves. He hauled himself up onto the rear deck, then scrambled forward to the turret. The open-top design, normally a fatal vulnerability, now provided access. Murphy swung his legs over the turret ring and positioned himself behind the 50 caliber machine gun. Flames licked up from the fighting compartment below, separated from Murphy by less than 3 feet of steel deck and the turret basket. He could feel heat through his boots, the metal floor becoming a griddle. The temperature at Murphy's position hovered around freezing, -10 Celsius ambient. But the burning vehicle beneath him radiated enough thermal energy that for the first time in 3 days his feet felt warm. Murphy later wrote in his autobiography, To Hell and Back, "My numbed brain is intent only on destroying. I am conscious only that the smoke and the turret afford a good screen, and that for the first time in 3 days my feet are warm." The dark irony of that statement, the first warmth in days, came from standing atop a bomb, captured Murphy's mindset. He'd moved beyond fear into pure function. The Germans were 500 meters away now, close enough that Murphy could see individual soldiers advancing in winter camouflage, time 0.5s. They'd watched the M10 crew flee. They assumed the burning vehicle was abandoned. They didn't expect return fire. Murphy chambered the first round in the 50 caliber. The Browning M2HB used a manual charging system, pull back the bolt, release, chamber round. The familiar motion steadied his hands. He positioned the field telephone receiver on his shoulder, pressed against his ear, so he could hear the artillery officer while keeping both hands on the machine gun. The smoke provided partial concealment, just as Murphy had calculated. Germans couldn't pinpoint his exact position through the black clouds pouring from the destroyer. But Murphy could see them clearly, white camouflage against snow, rifles at ready, advancing in practiced assault formation. Murphy opened fire. The 50 caliber roared, cyclic rate climbing to 550 rounds per minute, 90 rounds every 10 seconds. Tracer rounds every 5th bullet, red streaks arcing across the snow toward German infantry. The armor-piercing rounds, designed to penetrate aircraft and light vehicles, tore through human bodies with devastating effect. Private Charles Owen's later observation, the Germans were deathly afraid of 50 calibers, they had armor-piercing capabilities, proved prophetic. German soldiers dove for cover, scrambling into shell craters and depressions in the frozen ground. The assault formation fractured as men sought any protection from the machine gun fire. Murphy traversed the 50 caliber left to right, walking fire across the German line, suppressing their advance. Then Murphy spoke into the field telephone, calling adjustments to the artillery officer at battalion headquarters. "Add 50, he directed, watching where shells landed, calculating corrections. "Right, 100. Fire for effect." Seconds later, American 105mm howitzer shells began landing among the German infantry, high-explosive rounds detonating in air bursts above the snow, sending shrapnel down on unprotected soldiers. The Germans were caught between machine gun fire from the burning M10 and artillery raining from above. Their advance stalled at 400 meters. Officers screamed orders. Infantry tried to maneuver around the kill zone, but every time they moved, Murphy's .50 caliber found them. German tank commanders realized the burning American vehicle wasn't abandoned. Someone was firing from it. Turrets swung toward Murphy's position. The Panzer tanks advanced, main guns seeking the source of machine gun fire through the smoke. Murphy was fully exposed, standing atop a burning platform, visible to German forces from 3 directions. Flames roared beneath him. Ammunition continued cooking off inside the hull. Any second, the main ammunition stowage could detonate and blow the entire vehicle apart. But for the first time in 3 days, Murphy's feet were warm, and the Germans were dying. The impossible hour had begun. German infantry closed to within 300 meters of Murphy's burning platform, near enough that individual faces became visible through the smoke and snow. White winter camouflage, rifles held at the ready, officers gesturing, attempting to coordinate flanking maneuvers around the kill zone Murphy had created with machine gun fire and artillery. But every movement drew fire from the .50 caliber, and Murphy's aim remained deadly. The telephone receiver pressed against Murphy's ear as he coordinated with the artillery officer at battalion headquarters. "Closer," Murphy directed, watching where 105mm shells impacted among the German formations. "Add 25. Right 50. The adjustments brought American artillery within 75 meters of Murphy's own position, well inside the official 600-meter minimum for danger-close fire support. Shrapnel from American shells began landing near the burning M10, close enough that Murphy could hear fragments whistling past. The artillery officer's voice crackled through the receiver, asking for Murphy's exact position. German infantry had advanced to within 50 meters on the right flank, attempting to envelope Murphy's position. Murphy swung the .50 caliber toward the flanking squad and opened fire, tracer rounds marking his aim. Germans fell. Others dove for cover. The flanking attempt dissolved into bodies in snow. "How close are the enemy?" the artillery officer asked, concern evident even through static. Murphy's reply became famous. "If you just hold the phone a minute, I'll let you talk to one of the bastards." The quote captured Murphy's state of mind, dark humor under impossible pressure, the psychological space where fear transforms into function. Germans were close enough to hear, close enough that Murphy could see expressions, identify weapons, watch them die. Yet he remained focused on the tactical problem. Kill enough Germans to break their assault, coordinate artillery to maximize casualties, maintain fire discipline to conserve ammunition. Ammunition conservation became critical. The .50 caliber held between 300 and 450 rounds when fully loaded. Murphy had already fired over 200 rounds in the first 30 minutes. Every burst had to count. He shifted to controlled bursts, 5 to 10 rounds per trigger pull rather than sustained automatic fire. Enough to suppress and kill, not enough to waste precious ammunition. The Germans recognized their infantry assault had stalled. Tank commanders brought their Panzers forward, attempting to use armor to eliminate Murphy's position. 6 tanks advanced to within 100 meters, close enough that Murphy could see turret numbers and crew commanders in their hatches. Main guns traversed toward the burning M10. Murphy understood the geometry. Panzer tanks could not depress their main guns enough to hit a target at such close range when Murphy sat elevated on the M10's turret. German tank design, optimized for longer-range engagements on Eastern Front steppes, created a dead zone directly in front of the vehicles. Murphy occupied that dead zone. But tank-mounted machine guns could still kill him, and tank commanders could direct infantry to rush his position. Murphy shifted fire to the tank commanders exposed in their hatches. The .50 caliber's armor-piercing rounds couldn't penetrate Panzer frontal armor, but they could kill unprotected crew and damage vision ports. German commanders buttoned up, closing hatches, reducing visibility. Blind tanks without infantry support became vulnerable to American artillery and flanking fire. Then Murphy felt the impact. A German round, shell fragment or machine gun bullet, he never determined which, struck his right leg. The wound tore through trouser fabric and flesh, blood immediately visible. Pain registered as distant information, secondary to the immediate tactical problem of 250 Germans attempting to kill him. Murphy ignored the wound. The sub-zero cold provided natural hemostasis. Blood flow slowed as vessels constricted in freezing temperatures. He shifted weight to his left leg and continued firing. The telephone receiver remained pressed to his ear. Time Deutschland 5s. Artillery continued landing among German positions. The .50 caliber kept roaring. German infantry made one final push, attempting to close the distance while Murphy was wounded. They advanced to within 10 meters of the burning M10, close enough to throw grenades, close enough for Murphy to see individual faces in detail. Murphy traversed the machine gun in a deadly arc at point-blank range. Armor-piercing rounds designed to penetrate aircraft tore through human bodies at 10 meters with catastrophic effect. Germans fell in windrows. Private Charles Owen, watching from the woodline 40 yards behind Murphy's position, later recalled the scene. Boy, he was effective on that .50 caliber. I don't know whether he'd ever had .50 caliber training or not, but the Germans were deathly afraid of .50 calibers. They had armor-piercing capabilities. The German assault broke. Infantry could not advance past Murphy's fire. Tanks without infantry support faced American artillery and potential flanking attacks. German commanders made the rational tactical decision: withdraw to Holtzwihr, regroup, attempt another assault with fresh forces. Murphy watched German tanks fall back first, turrets traversing to cover their retreat. Infantry followed, dragging wounded, leaving bodies in snow. Murphy continued firing, killing Germans as they retreated, maintaining pressure until they were beyond effective range. Silence descended over the frozen field. Smoke from the burning M10 drifted across bodies scattered in snow. Murphy's .50 caliber fell silent, ammunition exhausted, barrel hot enough to steam in sub-zero air. Over 1 hour on the burning tank destroyer. Approximately 50 Germans killed or wounded by Murphy's fire alone, with artillery accounting for additional casualties. The German counterattack, 250 infantry and 6 tanks against 18 Americans, had been repelled by a 19-year-old lieutenant standing on an exploding vehicle. Murphy climbed down from the M10, right leg dragging, blood soaking through his trouser leg. The vehicle still burned behind him, ammunition still cooking off, the delayed detonation that should have killed him never quite arriving. He limped through snow toward the woodline where his men waited. Company B stared at their commander walking out of fire and smoke, wounded, alive. Sergeant Elmer Brawley would later testify, "Lieutenant Murphy, refusing to be evacuated, led us in a strong attack against the enemy, dislodging the Germans from the whole area. Murphy refused medical evacuation. The Germans were disorganized. Company B would counterattack immediately. The hour of fire had ended. The hour of reckoning had begun. Murphy's 18 men watched their 19-year-old commander limp through snow toward their position, blood trailing from his right leg, smoke rising from the burning tank destroyer behind him. They'd witnessed the impossible, one lieutenant holding off 250 Germans and 6 Panzer tanks for over an hour while standing atop an exploding vehicle. Now he was walking back to them, refusing evacuation, organizing counterattack. Sergeant Elmer Brawley later testified, "Lieutenant Murphy, refusing to be evacuated, led us in a strong attack against the enemy, dislodging the Germans from the whole area." Murphy's protective rage, the emotion that had sustained him through Sicily, Italy, and France, now drove Company B forward. The Germans were disorganized, their assault broken, their casualties mounting. Murphy recognized the tactical moment, counterattack immediately before the enemy could regroup. Company B advanced from the wood line, 18 men against a retreating but still numerically superior German force. But the psychological balance had shifted. German soldiers who'd watched one American fire from a burning vehicle for an hour, who'd seen their comrades cut down by machine gun fire and artillery, who'd witnessed their tanks retreat, those soldiers broke. Murphy's counterattack swept through German positions, capturing ground, securing the Holtzwihr completely by nightfall, January 26th. The 3rd Infantry Division capitalized on Murphy's stand. On January 27th, American forces captured Holtzwihr itself, eliminating the German strongpoint that had threatened the entire sector. The Colmar Pocket, already collapsing under American and French pressure, lost another critical position. By February 9, 1945, the pocket ceased to exist, the last German forces west of the Rhine eliminated. Murphy's hour on the burning tank destroyer had prevented German recapture of terrain essential to the entire offensive. Lieutenant Colonel Keith Ware immediately recommended Murphy for the Medal of Honor. The citation was drafted based on eyewitness testimony from Company B survivors and supporting units. On April 23, 1945, Murphy, still age 19, the award was officially announced. General Alexander Patch presented Murphy with the Medal of Honor and Legion of Merit on June 2, 1945, near Salzburg, Austria. The war in Europe had ended 3 weeks earlier. The Medal of Honor citation detailed Murphy's actions with precise language. Lieutenant Murphy commanded Company B, which was attacked by 6 tanks and waves of infantry, climbed on the burning tank destroyer, which was in danger of blowing up at any moment, and employed its .50 caliber machine gun against the enemy. He was alone and exposed to German fire from 3 sides, but his deadly fire killed dozens of Germans and caused their infantry attack to waver. For an hour, the Germans tried every available weapon to eliminate 2D Lieutenant Murphy, but he continued to hold his position. Germans reached as close as 10 yards, only to be mowed down by his fire. He received a leg wound, but ignored it and continued the single-handed fight until his ammunition was exhausted. His directing of artillery fire wiped out many of the enemy. He killed or wounded about 50. Murphy became America's most decorated soldier of World War II. Total decorations, 33 awards, including every U.S. Army Combat Award for Valor, Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, Legion of Merit, 2 Bronze Stars with V device, 3 Purple Hearts documented wounds in Sicily, France, and Holtzwihr, 5 campaign medals spanning North Africa to Central Europe. French and Belgian governments awarded their own decorations, Croix de Guerre, Legion of Honor. Murphy was credited with 241 enemy soldiers killed during the war, but victory carried cost measured in nightmares and sleepless nights. Murphy returned to Texas, a national hero, featured on Life magazine's cover, celebrated as the embodiment of American courage. Hollywood recruited him for 44 films, including To Hell and Back, 1955, Murphy playing himself in the adaptation of his autobiography. The film became Universal's highest-grossing production until Jaws in 1975. Yet Murphy struggled with what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, then called battle fatigue. He slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow, suffered recurring nightmares of combat, startled at sudden noises. Murphy became one of the first public figures to openly discuss combat trauma, advocating for veterans' mental health services decades before PTSD entered common vocabulary. On May 28, 1971, Murphy died in a plane crash near Roanoke, Virginia, age 45. The aircraft hit a mountain in fog, random tragedy, claiming a man who'd survived impossible odds in combat. He was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery, Section 46, grave 36611. Murphy's grave became the 3rd most visited at Arlington after President John F. Kennedy and the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. The Audie Murphy American Cotton Museum in Greenville, Texas, preserves his legacy. Murphy VA Hospital in San Antonio bears his name. Texas celebrates Audie Murphy Day annually on June 20th. Military academies still study January 26, 1945 as an example of individual impact on battle outcomes, but the mathematical resolution remains most compelling. January 26, 1945, 2 p.m., 18 Americans faced 250 Germans and 6 Panzer tanks in sub-zero cold. By 3:30 p.m., Germans repelled, approximately 50 casualties inflicted by Murphy alone, strategic terrain secured, division offensive maintained. The weapon, 1 field telephone and 1 .50 caliber machine gun. The platform, a burning tank destroyer that should have exploded. The operator, a 19-year-old 5'5", 112-pound sharecropper's son with a 5th-grade education. Gefreiter Klaus Weber, if he survived January 26th, never learned who the American was. He never learned the defender was 19 years old, weighed 112 pounds, quit school in 5th grade. He never learned Murphy's motivation was simply stated, "They were killing my friends." Some impossibilities become real, not because odds change, but because one person refuses to acknowledge the mathematics. January 26, 1945. Holtzwihr, France. A sharecropper's son stood on fire and rewrote war's equations. The Germans called him wahnsinnig, madman. History called him the most decorated American soldier of World War II. His men just called him Murphy, and they followed him anywhere.